We are so honored to be hosting Peng Shepherd, the author of the Book of M and the Cartographers. We have been all in love with the book. We've had so many reads on the book, and I would like to quote a couple of booksellers, if I may, because no other bookstore events are quoting us. So Kay Rosewick said, sharp characters, eerie settings, and many twists add up to a very satisfying thriller. And Jason Kennedy called it a fun and twisty read. And there was also this from Vivian Shaw, who is not a Boswellian, but she could be an honorary member after this review in the Washington Post. One of the triumphs of the Cartographers is the exploration of what it means to make a map. Does the act of surveying, measuring, drafting, and drawing the map affect the landscape it represents? Is it possible to map something without altering it in the process? How accurate can any map be, given that it only represents a snapshot of the landscape at one point in time? And to what extent does it matter? The Cartographers explores these questions with deep, vivid intensity. It will make you think twice about the power of paper maps, especially in a world where they're supplanted by electronic devices. Shepherd is the author of the Book of M, which was picked as the best book of summer by Today's Show and NPR's On Point. Tonight, we are very honored to have Ms. Shepherd in conversation with Jim Higgins, the book and arts editor of the Journal Sentinel. Please give them a big hand. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Daniel, for that very Danielish introduction tonight. As a way of getting started, Peng, would you be willing to read a little passage from the book?
Oh, yeah, sure. I've got to take this one. Hang on.
I think Chris got the establishing shot of the book already.
Yeah. Okay, I think okay, really super short. It's like a page and a half. Set the moon. This is from super early in the book. I think the only thing you need to know is that Nell's father has just passed away, and she has gone to his office at the New York Public Library to talk to the police and his boss and things like that. The library's back offices swirled quietly around her as she sat huddled on the edge of her father's desk, next to the mess strewn across it. Researchers were finally getting back to work in their cubicles, turning on their computers and shuffling through their mail. And past the staff door, patrons were browsing the stacks and choosing seats at reading tables, clicking on lamps and pulling out notebooks and flipping pages. Children were running through aisles and sneaking around the lobby. Taxis were pulling up and dropping off passengers outside. Nell tried to think about all of it out there and nothing in here. Gradually, she realized her hand was resting on the corner of the desk where the hidden lock was. Ever dramatic, her father long ago had a secret compartment built into his desk that only he, she, and perhaps Swan knew about. He kept especially valuable maps inside while working on them, for security's sake, he'd said, even though the NYPL had never been robbed in the history of its existence. But when Nell was young, and he'd been a slightly gentler version of himself, he had hidden little notes in there to her as well, and she would reply with childish drawings of maps she'd copied or created herself. All she had to do was push her index finger forward a little bit. The dullest, quietest thud told her the compartment had opened. Slowly, without moving anything but her hand, Nell reached inside. There was just one thing in there this time. A slim, leather-bound shape. Not a book, but a leather portfolio. She moved her fingers another subtle inch, feeling the familiar texture. It was the leather portfolio, she was certain. The one that had originally belonged to her mother before she died, and Nell's father had taken to using it as a way to remember her. As a child, the portfolio had held almost magical power to Nell. She used to watch her father slip it into and out of his briefcase when he went to work or came home in the evening, trying to imagine what beautiful work could lay inside. There were other maps he brought home too, but those came in clear plastic sleeves or cardboard folders. Only the most valuable, the most rare of them, were carried in the leather portfolio. Nell wondered at all of the priceless maps she must have laid eyes on as a small girl. Long after she and her father had stopped talking, she had sometimes thought of the portfolio and the things he still carried inside it. And now here it was, hidden in the mess. Lieutenant Cabe was still at the door beside his partner, the two of them giving instructions to the rest of the employees in the corridor, and Swan was over at the bookcase, plucking tissues gently out of a box to bring back to Nell. For a split second, no one was looking at her. Before she could think about what a huge mistake it would be, how much trouble it could get her into, Nell slipped the portfolio out from the compartment and into her tote bag in one smooth motion and returned her hand to the top of the desk.
All right. Well, we already know that something mysterious is going to happen here. Before we dig into your wonderful book, would be rude hosts, we didn't ask what the pandemic has been like for you and how things have been going and how you're feeling now.
Yeah, I'm very grateful that we are now beginning to be able to travel again. And I've done a couple of in-person events, and it's just so nice to be, back in person with readers and being able to talk about the book together instead of on Zoom. Zoom is wonderful, and I hope that we continue to be able to use it, in conjunction with in-person events, because sometimes it is so wonderful. I saw an event, I think it was between, there was a writer in London and then a writer in Norway, and they were having an event at a bookstore in LA, and it was just so great because that never could have happened before. But it has been really wonderful to also be back in person.
And have you been able to write over the last 2 years?
I was writing this actually.
So
yeah.
Yeah. It seems there seem to be two kinds of writers, people who had trouble doing anything and then people who just plowed on straight through it.
Yeah, I definitely plowed straight through, but I think I've told the story a couple times. I think this book is about 400 pages, and I also have 400 pages of stuff that I wrote that didn't make it in. It was a long pandemic.
So the future Library of America Peng Shepherd edition will have the 800-page version of the Cartographers. All right, tell the buyers hear that too. Okay, this is a novel about people who love maps and passionately make maps. And so I'm wondering, apart from the UWM maps that those folks graciously brought, what's the last map you touched physically?
The last map I touched physically. It was a copy of the London A to Z travel guidebook. They have a bunch of, because I originally thought this book was going to be set in the UK, actually. And so I had bought a London A to Z guidebook because I was looking for phantom settlements in the London maps too.
How many folks have read the Cartographers at this point? Okay, maybe a
we got to
quarter.
be careful with spoilers.
Yeah, and you have to stop me if I'm starting to spoil something, or this lady will stop me if I'm starting.
Yeah, I'm very anti-spoiler too. So,
would you tell us what a phantom settlement is?
Yes, a phantom settlement, it's a huge part of the book. It's a kind of an obscure-ish cartography term, and it means an error on a map, but an intentional one. So not a mistake, but something that a map maker intentionally hides in the map, and it can be anything from a tiny mountain where the land is actually flat, or a little dead end road somewhere that people are very unlikely to turn. But they hide them because they sort of function like copyright traps, I guess, essentially. So if a map maker hides a phantom settlement on their map and, it somehow mysteriously turns up on another map maker's map, the argument is that the only way that could happen, because the phantom settlement is an error and doesn't really exist, it's if they copied your work rather than, did their own. Because if the dead end road doesn't really exist and it's just an error, the only way it could be there is if they were looking at your map instead of the real world when they made their map.
So this is probably a good point to ask you about the genesis of this novel. So thinking back, I know it's not always possible to trace all the way back, but what was the very beginning point of writing the Cartographers?
No, I can trace it back very, very specifically, because this book is inspired by a real life cartography mystery, something that happened in the 1900s, the early 1900s. It relates to the maps over there. And I heard the story, I think about 10 years ago. I was in grad school, And one of my professors had a habit of starting every week by saying, did anyone, I don't know, read anything interesting or hear anything weird or just, something. And somebody said, well, I read this cool thing about dictionary makers. And it turns out the dictionary makers do a very similar thing to phantom settlements. They will hide fictitious entries in a dictionary, usually in the X's or the Y's or the Z's, because most people aren't looking there. And so that way, if their fake word and the fake entry turns up in someone else's dictionary, they know that they copied their word list. And we all thought that was very interesting. And then somebody else said, well, don't you know that they do the same thing with maps? And that's how I first heard about phantom settlements. And there's a very specific phantom settlement that is in rural upstate, or was in rural upstate New York. It was planted there. And that's the story. I don't know if I can tell that story. Is that too much of a spoiler, do you think? If I just tell the story of the real.
I don't think the real life story is too much of a spoiler.
Okay. So the real life cartography mystery that this book is based on, in the early 1900s, there were these two small-time map makers, and they had cornered the market early on foldable gas station, like highway driving maps, the ones that we all have or used to have in our glove compartment before Google Maps. And so they were the first ones out of the gate. They were selling their maps like hotcakes, and really big companies that had been slower to catch on to the trend, like Rand McNally, were changing course, trying to make their own maps. And these two small-time map makers were concerned that Rand McNally and H.M. Boucher and their competitors were copying their maps to catch up and get their share of the profits. And so these two guys, when they were out in rural upstate New York surveying the land for their next edition, they decided when they got to the middle of nowhere where there was nothing, that they would hide a phantom settlement right there, because there was nothing there. No one was likely to see it. So they made up and they hid a tiny town in that location, and they named it using a combination of their initials. And then fast forward, I don't know, a couple months or a year later, Rand McNally's edition of the same geographical area comes out, and these two map makers see their tiny town on Rand McNally's map. So they sue Rand McNally, and they claim copyright infringement because they said the only way that this town could appear on Rand McNally's map is if they copied our map instead of doing their own land survey. Because if they had gone out there and done their own land survey, they would have seen that there was nothing there because we made the town up. There's nothing there. And Rand McNally said, but there is something there. There's a town. And so these two map makers had no idea what to make of that. They got their lawyers, they got a couple of photographers, they got in the car and they drove all the way out to rural upstate New York to take pictures of the empty land and then go back and win in court. But when they got there, instead of nothing, there was a gas station, a general store, a fishing lodge, houses with people living in them, and an official record of the town in the county administration logs with the same name that these men had given it from their own initials. So this town that only these two men knew about and should not have existed at all somehow did. Yeah.
And suddenly you hear Rod Serling's voice in the background. And in your note, you explain a little more about why that happened, but we'll leave that as a mystery.
So I won't tell you the rest of the story. You have to read the book to find out. But if you do read all the way to the end, in the author's note at the back, I do tell you the second half of the real life mystery.
And I'm just curious, this is a trivia note, but after reading your book and your end note, and I looked up that town, and I discovered that John Green used it in his novel, Paper Town. Did you know that at any point?
I did. So I heard the story about 3 years before his book came out. And I'd been thinking about this book and trying to figure out how to write it, and trying and 20 pages and throw it away and 20. And then his book came out. I thought, okay, well, I can never write mine now because it's the same. So I think they are different enough, though. Yeah.
They're different. Yeah. They're different. So in the cartographers, we have Nell as the hero, a youngish woman who is passionately devoted to maps, but isn't working where she used to work because of a falling out with her father. And you read about his death. And you move backward and forward in time between her present life and the lives of her parents and their peers when they were younger. I have to ask you, here in Wisconsin, they all went to UW, her parents' generation, to not the good UWM here in Milwaukee, but that other UW
The other
in
one.
Madison.
Yeah.
What led you to choose UW for their school?
So I knew when I was writing about them, because they're all PhD students in cartography, and I knew I wanted a university with a really good geography department, and I didn't want to use one of the usual suspects because I just thought it's kind of boring, if I like Harvard or something. And so I was online researching master's and PhD programs in geography. And it turns out that the University of Wisconsin over in Madison has a really good geography department. And it just felt, the more I started, I was looking up pictures of the campus and reading about, the professors there. And it just started to feel like exactly the kind of place that 7 brilliant friends might meet. And then, your winters are pretty harsh and pretty long. And so I could imagine that, you would get sort of stuck, not trapped, but, kind of sequestered on campus and spend even more time together and get even more insular and more intimate. And it just felt like a really great kind of mysterious, sort of not hostile, but you know what I mean, environment that could really foster a really deep and sort of dangerous friendship like that.
You know that people from here tend to go down to Arizona, where you're from, in the wintertime because of that hostile environment. There are many, you talked about it being a dangerous friend. This group of 7 folks, you may not have intended this, but some of those scenes are so idyllic about this. It could be like a war movie where they're bonded together. Or I thought a lot about American utopian experiments, because they even get a house together at one point. Did you have any thoughts or agenda about the friendship of these folks or what you wanted to do with that?
Yeah, I was really interested in, it was 2 things. One was that is often a really big turning point in all of our lives, that moment between when you're just finishing university or graduate school and entering, the real world, and you are an adult, but you're still really innocent and kind of young in a lot of ways. And there is always an awakening, either good or bad, that happens there, where you emerge out into the real world and you realize how things really are. And yeah, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. And so I wanted to explore that moment in their lives because it's pretty pivotal. And then I was also really interested in examining how similar and sometimes unrecognizable love versus obsession could be, because they all love each other very much. And they're all also very obsessed with maps and map making, and the line, it's really easy to blur the line between love and obsession. And I think they do that in the book.
Yeah. Many scenes in this book take place in the New York Public Library. And I gather you spent a lot of time in the New York Public Library. Yeah. So what was the experience like? And to what extent does your book reflect the actual library?
So I used to live in New York City, and not at the time, I was writing my first book when I lived in New York, and then I moved away and started writing this one. And then the pandemic happened. And so I spent years not in New York trying to remember and get that whole library exactly right, because I wanted the book to feel, when you're reading about the library, I wanted it to feel exactly like when you're in that library. And so right before, I think, copy edits were done, I got vaccinated and everything opened up a little bit, and I was able to go back to New York and walk the halls one last time and make sure that it was, that I had written about it. My memory of it was the way that it still felt, and it was, which is good.
Are you a visual imagination person?
What do you mean?
Do you think in visual images? Do you have a good memory for how places look?
Yeah, for places. Although whenever somebody asks me, because someone will always ask me who would play your character in a movie or something, and I don't see the people. I never have an answer for that, but definitely places and scenes. Yeah.
So far, I've kind of given the impression maybe this is an ultra realistic novel because we're talking about all, but to not spoil it, there's some altered reality in some parts.
Some weird stuff happens,
of this novel. I think it's fair to say that they're such great map makers, they might be able to affect reality a little bit. What were you thinking there?
I think it was that it, a map is just on the face of it something that you look at to figure out how to get from here to here, but if you go deeper, it also is kind of like a story. A map is sort of telling you the story, and it comes in a bunch of different ways. Who drew the map? Where are they from? What time were they drawing it in? What are they trying to tell you about? Are they trying to tell you about the geography or the political situation, or I don't know, population demographics? Like what's the story they're trying to tell you with this map? And because every person is biased in some way, every map is kind of biased in some way. And so it is telling you some truth, but it's also telling you not necessarily a lie, but it might be not telling you everything. And I wanted to, so there is some fantastical stuff that happens in the book, and it is all related to what exactly is a map showing you. And if there was something missing from or hidden on a map and you could only find it, would that actually change not just the reality of your understanding, but actual reality? And so I just wanted to make that more literal in that way. Yeah.
Now, along with the fun stuff with obsession and those other things, a scary part of this book for me is there's a company that's developing an extremely powerful database of maps that makes connections maybe way beyond that many of us would be comfortable with. And I'm worried, are you a person that's concerned about data privacy and big algorithms, big tech? Where do you come from?
Yeah, I am. I mean, there's definitely so much that we're gaining from technology like that, even just with maps. If you have Google Maps, it's going to be able to tell you so much more in some ways than a paper map could. Is that road closed? Does that road no longer exist? Is there a faster way? Is there a highway that's just been built? And so we definitely are gaining a lot, but we are losing something too. We're giving a lot, and we don't even realize what we're giving, I think. And yeah, that was really fun to contrast that kind of a map with the paper map.
And I'm happy to say that none of those map things are perfect yet, because I can tell you stories of streets that don't exist. Or place. Can I get an amen on that from anybody? All right. Thank you. Has writing this story changed how you feel about maps or how you view maps?
I think it's just given me a greater appreciation, because I don't know. I didn't actually know a lot about maps before I started writing this book, but I've always loved them. And I always had that feeling whenever I opened one up, even if it was a map of my own hometown and it was a very familiar place, that if I just looked long enough, I was going to see something on it that I hadn't seen before. And that, I just love that feeling. It sort of feels like how if you reread your favorite book, you might get something out of it again that you hadn't gotten before the last time you read it. And so I just wanted this book to give readers hopefully that same feeling when they're reading the book that I get when I look at a map like that.
Now, there are a couple of maps printed in your book.
Mm-hmm.
What was your relationship with those maps? I mean, did you supervise somebody drawing them, or how did that work?
All the maps in the book that are pictured are real maps from history.
Okay.
But one of them, without spoiling anything, there is a little something extra added onto it. But the other map, the map that's actually over there, the one that this book is based on from the 1930s, that, so at the time that I heard this story 10 years ago, I couldn't stop thinking about this, this little map that these two map makers had made. And so 10 years ago, I got on, I think it was eBay or something, and I found that they had copies of that map for, I don't know, $5 or something. And so I bought one because I just wanted, I don't know, a little piece of the mystery to share in the story. And so I had a copy that I would return to every year and look at it and just, wish that I could be writing this book. And then fast forward 10 years later, and I had finally finished this book, and my editor said, well, this book is all about this map. We've got to put the map in it. And I said, great. And so I guess the art department went out and was looking for a copy. And in the 10 years since I've written the book, they become more and more rare online. And so the publisher actually couldn't find one anywhere to buy. And so I ended up taking my copy to a specialty print shop, and they scanned it on a huge machine. And so the copy that's in this book is actually my copy. That was special because, I spent so long wanting to write this book, and then I finally did. And then I was able to, take the copy that I carried for 10 years and and get it in there.
So this is like a Borges story now. The reality is warping itself to shape like your book.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
I want to say, though, that I committed absolutely no murders to get the map. I did none of the murders that
We
may
can't
or may not happen.
necessarily say that about anybody else involved in this project. So you, in a statement for the NEA, who I think had a hand in maybe funding some of your time from this book.
Yeah,
at some
they
point.
give out research grants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You write, my books all develop this way, collecting themselves piece by piece over years, and this one has been no different. So I'm wondering, how do you know when you have pieces and how do you know when you have a book?
That's a good question. I think I don't know for a really long time, actually. And with this one, especially because it took so many years to get there. But I think my first drafts are always such a mess like that because I'm finding my way through it by writing it rather than outlining it or planning it. And it's just a feeling of that you just can't give up, because sometimes I'll have an idea and I'll write 50 pages and it doesn't feel like it's going anywhere, or it's a huge mess. And then when I set it aside, I feel relieved. And every time I tried to set this aside, and I set it aside so many times over the years, I just couldn't leave it there. I had to keep going and picking it back up. And I guess that's how I know, I think.
And what were you doing while you set it aside? Is there another like future Peng book there that's in pieces that you're waiting to put together?
There's so many pieces of Peng books.
This is also in its way a father-daughter story.
Mhm.
So there are probably a lot of fathers out here tonight. What advice would Nell give us?
Oh, Nell would. Well, Nell's interesting because she loves her father a lot, but she doesn't know him very well. And I think that's part of the reason why cartography is so important to her, because she thinks that if she can be as good of a cartographer as he is, then that might be the way kind of into his heart. And it might finally allow them to have the relationship that she's always wished they could have, because he's always held her at arm's length. And I think she would say, I think she would just say to not try to, like, she was clinging too hard to cartography as the thing that was supposed to be the key in. And it's just that there wasn't a door the whole time. She could have always walked through, and she had kind of built this idea that cartography was this door, this key, that if only she could fix that, then she could get in.
I think maybe one lesson we can draw from their stories is really smart people sometimes get in the way of their own relationships.
Yeah. Well, the two of them definitely do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a good point for me to ask for questions from you. Does anyone have a question for Peng? Please. And I should repeat that.
Oh, yeah.
Which of the 7 grown-up cartographers was your favorite in this book?
Definitely Romy, I think. Yeah, she was the first one that I figured out how to write, and she's, I think, the one that knows the most too, because she's, the best friend of the mother and very close to the father. And so, yeah, being able to write somebody that knew that much of the story and had been so close to the really important characters in the book was a lot of fun.
I think one of these two had a bet on that. So, and somebody won over here. No, okay. Another question. Can you tell us if you're working on a new project? She has like 5 or 6 new projects, but which one are you actively working on?
I'm actually halfway through the first draft of my 3rd book. So coming along a lot faster than this one.
And
thankfully.
You're not going to tell us in detail what that's about, because that's not how you work.
So yeah, I don't think I could tell you what it's about, but I think so. If the Book of M is like post-apocalyptic, if this one's a mystery, the 3rd one feels like a sci-fi thriller is how it's feeling.
And here's a point I can put in a plug for something else that Peng wrote. For those of you who read online at tor.com, you have, I guess it's a long story or a novelette, or it's called The Future Library. It's a wonderful story. Would you tell us a little bit about The Future Library?
Yeah, that one is also based on a real life. It's like a public art. It's like a long-term public art project that's taking place in the forests of Norway right now. And what they're doing is, I think about 10 or 25 years ago, an artist planted 1,000 trees. And at the end of 100 years, every year they ask a writer. I think they've asked Margaret Atwood so far and a couple of other people to write a book, but the book is not going to be released in our lifetimes. 100 years from now, they're going to cut down 100 of the 1,000 trees and print the books on those papers. Yes, it's a really interesting project, and they're trying to draw awareness to like climate change and the environment, and but the novelette is based on that public art project. It takes place right at the end of so about 100 years from now, right when they're about to cut the trees down, and at that time in the story, that forest is the last remaining forest in our world. And the arborist who's caring for it ends up discovering a secret about those 1,000 trees that are left that changes everything. And they have to decide whether or not they want to cut them down or not, or what to do.
So if the future library called you and said, "Oh, Peng, we love that story. Would you write one of these books? Would you write one of the 100-year books?"
I don't know. I think about it a lot. They did read it, and I got a nice little note from them, and I was that was really nice, because I didn't know if they would ever see it, or I didn't know if they would like it if they read it, because part of the story is a little bit about should we actually cut these trees down? And is what we are doing with this project the right thing? But they were very sweet about it, and I'm very honored that they read it.
If they were like most publishers on Twitter, they'd be clamoring everyone to put their pre-orders now for those books. Am I right? Am I right in that, Daniel? All right. So recently, you've been on the Writing Excuses podcast with Mary Robinette and some other writers, and talking about craft topics in writing and some complex things like dealing with multiple points of view, like you do in this book. And what did you learn about the craft of writing while writing this book?
It was really interesting to write this book, because the way that I wrote it was that I wrote the frame, which was the present story with Nell and her father, who's an old man who ends up passing away right at the beginning of the book, and then her present time journey. And then the middle part where I jump back 30 years and we're looking at the 7 friends who are the ones who discovered this map in the first place, figure out the secret on it, and then it starts to tear them apart. All of that middle stuff. So I guess kind of the core of the mystery, that I kept, it was very different every iteration. One draft, they were a secret society. And then in another draft, they were like evil. And then in another draft, they were some other kind of thing. And so it really felt like puzzle pieces, where I would like pick up a piece and try to put it in there, and that didn't fit. So I throw it away, and then I would pick up another piece and try to fit it in there, and that didn't fit either. So I think I learned, it was just a really interesting process of trying to see how much you can change about the story. And every time I think I was trying to tell the same story, I was just using different pieces. And it wasn't until they all clicked that I realized, they aren't 7 enemies, or they aren't a secret society. They're 7 friends. And it's about, the love they have for each other that tears them apart, not necessarily their animosity for each other or their rivalry.
Are you a listen to music person while you're writing?
Yeah, but only instrumental.
Oh, I was wondering if there's like a special theme or anything for this book.
Oh, I actually end up listening to a lot of video game music, because it's usually pretty ambient and like like a little bit epic or a little bit quiet or kind of, so yeah, something like that.
You have outed yourself in public as a gamer, someone who likes to play. So what games are you playing now?
Well, I spent the whole pandemic playing Breath of the Wild, because it was just, and I also, during the pandemic, I played the horrible lottery where we all got online at some exact time and we clicked madly on the buy button for Walmart.com or whatever to get a PlayStation 5. But I'm one of the people that actually did. Somehow I managed to get a PlayStation 5. So I'm working my way through the new games, and it's been fun.
Do you think gaming influences your writing at all?
I'm sure that it does. I don't know if I could say any kind of one-to-one thing, like I would want to write an adventure sort of like that, but it definitely does, the same way that movies do or other books do, or even music. Yeah.
If you had the chance, would you write a game?
Yes, I think it would be so fun. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Am I supposed to wrap up here, Chris?
No, we have an internet question.
Please.
So Sue asked, what writers living or dead would you like to meet?
I think she's asking Peng, not me, that question. Okay, what writers, living or dead, would you like to meet?
First and foremost would be Ursula K. Le Guin, for sure. She's my hero. I would love to meet, well, I have met Jeff Vandermeer, and he's wonderful. I would love to meet Margaret Atwood, and I'm also a huge fan of Fonda Lee and Rebecca Roanhorse and R.F. Kuang. I've met all of them, and they're wonderful. Buy their books.
If someone here has never read anything by Ursula K. Le Guin, what would you have them start with?
Good question. The first book I read of hers, actually, it's one of her more minor works, and I think it's sort of in the middle of her career. I read The Lathe of Heaven, and that's one of my favorites, I think, because it's the first one. But I would also recommend any of the Earthsea series. I think they're just beautiful. And they also have really wonderful maps. The Earthsea map is really beautiful.
So in the cartographers, we have Nell and many of the folks that are great exponents of printed maps. The older, the better printed map. And then we have the database electronic people.
Mhm.
And then in the future library, we have some discussion about whether we should print books or not. And so what I'm leading to here is printed books and ebooks.
Yeah.
Do you have a strong preference? How do you feel about those two subjects?
If I have the choice, I like to read on paper just because I think I concentrate better. And that's just how I grew up. I started reading with paper books, so I love them. But I think ebooks and also audiobooks are wonderful. And it's however you can read. And I do read tons of ebooks. I was reading an ebook on the plane flight over here, and that is so much easier than, sticking 4 paperbacks in your suitcase. So
are you concerned at all with paper and other issues about what's happening with printed books?
I am. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see the way that the publishing industry goes, because it is really nice to have paper books, but
Yeah.
we are, we are just decimating our forests, and there has to be, we have to do something.
Questions, please. Do you have a favorite early reader?
I do. It's my mom. Yeah. She's one of those book a day people. She will, in fact, I just gave her a book yesterday, I think at 10:30 at night. I was over at her house dropping off my dog so that she could watch him while I flew here. And I gave it to her and I said, well, here's the next one. I read this recently. I loved it. And she called me in the morning before my plane took off. I just love it. When you get back, we're going to have to talk about it over dinner. So, she's, voracious reader. And she's a, if I need fast comments so really it's, I have my first draft and I'm always just like, I don't even know what this is. Please just read it. And she'll read it, give me comments, and they're wonderful.
Now, reliable sources tell me your mother is famous in Arizona and everyone knows who she is.
Including Daniel's sister. Apparently my mom hikes with his sister or something. We had no idea until about a week ago. It's she's retired now, but she used to be a broadcast news anchor on the local news there. Yeah.
Questions with the glasses? It's not really a question. Our reader wanted to know, Book of M had a magical real or a fantasy element, as does this book. So why do you write that way, Peng?
Yeah.
Why do you do that?
I think so. I grew up reading science fiction, fantasy. That was the first genre that I discovered as a kid, and that feels like home. And then I got older and I did an MFA in creative writing at NYU, and that was a lot more literary. And so then my reading taste, they broadened a lot, and I developed a appreciation for literary fiction. But I think, I don't know if it's me or if it's where you start reading or something, but it just felt like, and anything I wrote in the program too, always ended up getting weird in the same way. And my professors would be like, this is really good, but could you just make it like normal? Not so, like, just make it like, does this weird stuff have to happen? I was like, well, yeah, I don't know. But I think the books choose you. You know, I think that if I tried to write something without the weirdness would still get in there somehow. So,
You know, and Peng did not approve me saying this, but I think we're in the age where the boundaries are down between all these genres, that people feel
yeah.
free to draw from wherever. And you mentioned Jeff Vandermeer.
Mhm.
Jeff and Ann Vandermeer are big proponents of what they call the new weird.
Mhm.
And that's really a little fantasy, a little horror, just things are a little
Speculative
off.
stuff. Yeah.
Speculative. And
Yeah.
doesn't that kind of fit the reality we're living in? At least,
I think
at least
so, yeah.
emotionally in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. you
Yeah,
know?
no, I think so. Yeah.
Do you ever feel like you're going to come back to these characters, or they want you to write another story about them?
I do. Yeah. Especially for the Book of M, my editor and I talked a long time about if we were going to do a sequel or not. So I really love series too. I hope to write a series one day. I think that'd be fun. But I also really like the way that both of these two books, the first book and this book, ended. And I think there is something for kind of leaving an ending to stand on its own. But yeah, I definitely do think about it all the time.
I thought the ending of this book, which I won't spoil, it ends, and it also possibly leaves that door open if you want to come back here. So good job on that. So I think we're have to draw this to a close. So there's time to sign books. Is there any last thing you want to say while we're up here?
I'm just thank you so much for coming and for listening. And I hope you enjoy the Cartographers if you do pick them.